Owned by business tycoon and former Senator Manny Villar in a move that raised eyebrows. And the king, LeBron James, now shares yet another record with the late basketball icon Kobe Bryant in the NBA as fans remember Kobe on his second death anniversary. We begin with this. 3 more people died because of the Omicron coronavirus variant. The health department confirmed this, saying the Omicron death toll is now 5. The agency says 3 of the 5 Omicron deaths were senior citizens. All of them had reported underlying illnesses. Of the tally, 1 was partially vaccinated, another was unvaccinated, while the inoculation status of the remaining 3 are still being verified. No other details were provided. So far, at least 535 Omicron infections have been detected in the country. The DOH earlier confirmed the detection of cases of the stealth Omicron of the BA2 sublineage, but it stressed the stealth Omicron has no significant difference with the other sublineage of the variant. Now, it remains to be seen if Metro Manila will be placed under a more relaxed COVID-19 alert level next month, but some hospitals in the region are certainly seeing improvements in their situation. As more COVID-19 beds are freeing up and admissions for other illnesses are likely to increase, Tristan Adalo checks the situation in a hospital in Quezon City.
With declining COVID-19 patients in need of hospitalization, a number of Metro Manila hospitals are considering opening wards for patients with other illnesses in the coming days. Such is the case at the National Kidney Transplant Institute or NKTI, a COVID-19 referral hospital in Quezon City.
Sa NKTI, medyo naman nararamdaman namin. Dati mga 20 plus new cases, mga 11 na lamang. Puno pa rin kami. Kasi because of these kidney patients, that they stay naman for a longer time. Hindi parehas ng iba na ilang araw lamang kasi hindi naman sila nagda-dialysis.
The hospital lacks manpower as around 400 of its staff are still on quarantine. But the management says it is ready to open non-COVID facilities.
Nagkakaroon din siyempre ng COVID ang aming health worker. So that's taken into account, no? Hindi lang bed ang iniisip namin, kundi yung nurses din na mag-aalaga sa kanila, yung healthcare worker natin. So unti-unti, mabubuksan din hopefully next week, sabi nga namin, okay, depende sa ating load, maybe bubuksan na ang isang non-COVID ward.
For Private Hospitals Association of the Philippines or PHAPI, there is a big difference in hospital utilization at the height of the Omicron and Delta surge. It says some of its members are also planning to open up more units that will cater to illnesses other than COVID-19.
Ang cases ngayon are mga 95 to 98% are mild and asymptomatic. So most of them can be treated sa isolation facilities. They can be treated by home care procedures, pwedeng teleconsultation lang. Nung Delta variant, medyo nahirapan tayo, no? Kasi most of the cases need hospitalization. Kasi umabot sila sa moderate, severe, and critical. At yun ang nahihirapan ang mga hospitals.
According to the Health Department's COVID-19 tracker, 13 hospitals in Metro Manila are classified as critical risk and 10 as high risk. Overall bed utilization in the region is at 47%. But besides a sick workforce, hospitals are also facing dwindling staff, especially among nurses who want to work overseas.
We're expecting na mag-umpisa na ulit sila na mag-apply abroad. And some are actually nakapag-resign last year and they are waiting for the call na lang from the foreign hospitals.
In addition to manpower concern, hospitals grapple with billions of pesos in unpaid claims from PhilHealth. Hospital groups will meet with the government insurer on January 27 to discuss how to settle the issue. Private hospitals say that unpaid claims from PhilHealth have reached a hefty amount of 25 billion pesos. And if all talks fail, around 60 hospitals from Batangas, Quezon, Bulacan, and Northern Luzon warn that they will cut ties with PhilHealth. Tristan Adalo, CNN Philippines.
We're seeing fewer COVID-19 cases nationwide compared to previous days. The Health Department reports more than 15,700 new infections. The second day, the tally fell below 20,000 in nearly 3 weeks. Active cases dropped to over 230,000, excluding data from 3 laboratories. Nearly 33,000 people recovered, while 66 patients died. Despite the general downtrend in COVID-19 cases, the health department says infections are up by 87% in the Visayas and 165% in Mindanao from the previous week. The agency says Western and Central Visayas, as well as the Davao region, have the highest average of cases since January 19. Their bed utilization and ICU use are low to moderate risk classifications. Now, soon you can test yourself for possible COVID-19 infection at home, but the right timing and use of self-administered antigen test kits are key to getting accurate results. How do we use them properly? Carolyn Bonkin will walk us through the process.
Labnovation's rapid antigen test is one of the self-administered COVID-19 test kits approved by the Food and Drug Administration. Its distributor, ClearBridge Medical Philippines, will show us how to use this properly. First, lay the test cassette on a clean and dry surface. Place the tube into the stand, then add the solution. Gently insert the absorbent tip of the swab into your nostrils.
You have to rotate the swab 5 times against the wall of the nasal area for each nostrils.
Then dip the swab sample into the test tube with solution, mix and squeeze 10 to 15 times. Add 3 drops to the test cassette and wait for at least 10 minutes for the result. Unlike rapid antigen test kits used by healthcare professionals that require a nasopharyngeal swab deep into the nasal cavity to get samples, self-administered antigen test kits are designed for easier use. Samples are taken from the anterior nares, which is more shallow.
It's like cleaning your nose with the cotton buds. So it's more comfortable to use, cheaper and safer than going outside. Of course, if you have children, it's more easy to use.
Studies show out of 100 COVID-positive people, this test kit can catch 97 of the cases. Health officials have advised the public to use self-test kits at the right time.
Ibig sabihin, gagamit lang po kayo ng test kapag kayo ay nakakaramdam ng simptomas. Dahil ang antigen test po ay most accurate pa rin kapag kayo ay nakakaranas ng simptomas dulot ng COVID-19.
In terms of the use, as per the current literature, wala siyang pinagkaiba sa professional use na dapat gamitin siya within 5 days ng onset of symptoms.
Labnovation self-test kits will be sold in boxes of 1, 5, and 20 at a suggested retail price between 250 and 350 pesos, about 10 times lower than the average RT-PCR test.
Game changer siya kasi pwede mo siyang gamitin sa airlines, di ba? Pwede mo siyang gamitin sa schools. Kapag dumating yung time na mag-start tayong try mag face-to-face, even to the offices and companies, mas accessible na yung testing. You don't need to risk yourself going to the lab or hospital just to have yourself tested.
ClearBridge Medical will sell this in their pharmacy. They're also in talks with major drugstores nationwide for distribution. But Dr. Mozo says it will be sold in the market once the health department issues the guidelines on the use of self-test kits. The health department is setting up a system that will allow the public to report antigen test results to the government anonymously. Aside from Labnovation, the FDA also approved Abbott's PanBio antigen self-test kits, while 31 other brands are under review. Carolyn Bonkin, CNN Philippines.
Baguio City begins rolling out booster shots in pharmacies in a bid to get more people protected against the coronavirus. Participating drugstores include Watson's Pharmacy and Mercury Drug. The Octo Research Group earlier said cases were surging in the city, which detected the Omicron variant last week. Mayor Benjamin Magalong says the variant is now dominant in Baguio. But Magalong tells CNN Philippines infections seem to be plateauing.
Our positivity rate has been going down for the past 23 days. December 28, that was the start of the first peak, and the second was in January 3. And after that, it was a downtrend all the way until yesterday. And we're expecting that the plateauing will probably go on for the next 2 weeks, and we're expecting a downtrend sometime second week of February.
Magalong says cases there are now down to about 400 daily from a record high of 557. Parents should not be afraid to get their young children inoculated against COVID-19. Citing studies done in the United States, pediatric infectious disease experts say this age group had common reactions to the COVID-19 vaccine. These include pain and inflammation on the injection site, headaches, chills, muscle pain, and fever. The government plans to begin inoculating the 15.56 million 5 to 11-year-old age population next week using a lower dose of the Pfizer vaccine.
Aasahan po talaga natin na merong mga batang maglalagnat kaysa loob ng 2 o 3 araw pagkatapos mabakunahan. So, bigay muna po tayo ng paracetamol. Siguro pag hindi po yan bumaba ng 24 oras despite the paracetamol intake, then tama po na ipakita po or dalhin po sa doktor.
Experts also recommend a 2-week gap between the COVID-19 shot and other vaccines, such as for influenza. A key COVID-19 vaccine trial now underway in the United States. Pfizer and BioNTech began assessing a new shot that specifically targets the highly infectious Omicron variant. CNN's Mandy Gaither has a closer look in tonight's Health Minute.
Giving Omicron a shot. Pfizer says they've started manufacturing an Omicron-specific vaccine, and they're now testing it to evaluate its safety, tolerability, and level of immune response.
We are looking to see if we can create a vaccine that covers Omicron and doesn't forget the other variants.
Pfizer's study will examine the Omicron-specific vaccine as a primary dose and 1,400 healthy adults ages 18 to 55.
And I caution you that we need to be careful, because if other variants emerge, this Omicron-specific vaccine may not have adequate coverage against future variants.
Health experts say the trial can potentially answer 2 major questions. Does this vaccine make a difference? And is a 4th dose really needed? The announcement comes as Omicron appears to be plateauing in the U.S., with health officials saying the country is heading in the right direction.
The best case scenario is that in a matter of several weeks to a month or so, we'll continue to come down and down.
Meanwhile, Pfizer's CEO says that in the future, getting a COVID-19 vaccine could be like getting the flu shot.
What I'm hoping that we will have it is a vaccine that we will have to do once a year, like we do for many other things. Once a year, it is easier to convince people to do it.
For today's Health Minute, I'm Mandy Gaither.
More news overseas. Israel's COVID-19 advisory board pushes for a 4th vaccine shot for all adults. The panel says data analysis shows the additional shot doubled protection against infection and against serious illness by more than 3 times. The board recommends getting the 2nd booster more than 5 months after the 1st. This is subject for approval by the chief of Israel's health ministry. More countries report all-time highs in daily case counts fueled by Omicron. South Korea's prime minister says the variant is now spreading in full force with a record 13,000 new infections on Tuesday. The country is now focusing COVID-19 measures on reducing severe cases and deaths. Japan saw more than 62,000 cases also on Tuesday, the first time it surpassed the 60,000 mark. 37 of the country's 47 prefectures are now under a quasi-state of emergency. The Omicron surge also prompted Japan to allow younger patients at lower risk to self-administer antigen tests and isolate without a doctor's diagnosis. Germany, meanwhile, listed 164,000 new cases in the last 24 hours. Omicron also crippling economies worldwide. The International Monetary Fund says Omicron is creating an obstacle course for the global economy, slowing growth, particularly in the United States and China. Up ahead on Newsnight, the television frequencies previously used by media giant ABS-CBN now in the hands of billionaire Manny Villar's company, as well as other broadcasters. And the Philippines slumps in a global corruption perception index, ranking 117th out of 180 countries and territories. Details when we return.
universe was the ultimate. But there's more. Dahil tinawag ko ako ng Panginoon for a major, major purpose. To guide the youth, help communities, and to bring others closer to Him. Kaya I take care of my health through proper diet, exercise, and MX3 capsule. I am ready to serve. Kasi para sa Panginoon, hindi lang ako fourth runner-up. First place ako sa puso niya.
Mahalagang paalala, ang MX3 capsule ay hindi gamot at hindi dapat gamiting panggamot sa anumang uri ng sakit.
The Philippines falls behind in a global corruption perception index, slipping to 117th place out of 180 countries and territories. Trisha Tarada gives us a look behind the ranking and how some presidential aspirants plan to combat corruption.
The Philippines further slides down in the Corruption Perception Index, or CPI, released by Transparency International. The country ranks 117th out of 180 countries, 2 places down from its 2020 ranking. The CPI uses a scale of 0 to 100. 0 indicates that a government is highly corrupt, while the higher score up to 100 means that a country has very clean record. In 2021, the Philippines got a score of 33 out of 100. Transparency International says it is the country's lowest since 2012. This also means the Philippines drops below the global average of 43 and Asia-Pacific region's average of 45. According to Transparency International, the Philippines is a significant decliner, losing 5 points since 2014. The International Anti-Corruption Watchdog says since the election of President Duterte, the Philippines has, quote, also seen a sharp decline in freedom of association and freedom of expression, making it harder to speak up about corruption, unquote. CNN Philippines reached out to acting presidential spokesperson Carlo Nograles, but he did not respond. Corruption is among the hottest issues the presidential aspirants are addressing in this year's elections. Vice President Leni Robredo vows to ensure transparency in all government transactions. Senator Manny Pacquiao says he won't compromise as he promises to put all corrupt officials behind bars. Manila Mayor Isko Moreno assures the public that he won't tolerate corruption and will seek accountability against those who steal public funds. Senator Panfilo Lacson, meanwhile, says change must come from the government itself. Former Senator Bongbong Marcos vows to strengthen the checks and balances in the government to ensure proper disposal of the budget. On Monday, President Duterte says he will expose in due time a corrupt candidate running for president. However, presidential aspirant Leody de Guzman says Mr. Duterte is just trying to make himself relevant with his threat. Trisha Tarada, CNN Philippines.
The Commission on Elections defends its decision to proceed with ballot printing while excluding those declared nuisance candidates despite temporary restraining orders against their dismissed bids. COMELEC spokesperson James Jimenez says serial numbers were already assigned per ballot before the Supreme Court issued the TROs.
Keeping to a schedule because we are very concerned that if we don't start now, then we might run into problems later on. We're facing the TROs. No, every time a TRO is sent to us and we are asked to comment, we participate. Hindi naman napapabayaan po yung mga kaso ng mga taong yun. Early days pa lang naman. And the commission can very, very certainly order a reprinting of some of these ballots. Again, early days pa lang po tayo. we have not yet even approached peak printing capacity.
Those who secured TROs but were excluded from the ballot were a vice presidential hopeful, Wilson Ahmad, a senatorial hopeful, Norman Marquez, and party list group Juan Pinoy. An update now on some presidential aspirant. Senator Manny Pacquiao says he does not feel alluded to after President Duterte threatened to name the most corrupt presidential bet. Pacquiao adds he's ready to release his statement of assets, liabilities, and net worth, or SALN, because he has nothing to hide about his wealth. The retired boxing champ also says Mr. Duterte has the right to name aspirants who do not deserve to be elected. Vice President Leni Robredo also welcoming the president's plan to reveal the shortcomings of presidential bets. As long as the information is true, she says it would help people assess the integrity of candidates. Manila Mayor Isko Moreno also open to making his SALN public if elected president. He adds he already sent a copy of his SALN to the Office of the Ombudsman, saying he has nothing to hide. Former Senator Bongbong Marcos will allow abortion in extreme cases like rape, incest, or if the woman is unable to bear a child. In an interview with talk show host Boy Abunda, Marcos said a large number of women hospitalized because of botched abortions is a concern. But he noted the law should be specific on who can access the procedure. And Senator Ping Lacson pushes for a retirement program for overseas Filipino workers. He also wants to provide OFWs technological resources to keep them connected to their families back home. COMELEC is confident that national candidates will show up in its series of televised debates slated to start in February. But as presidential forums and sit-down interviews take off, the poll body is making this appeal.
Wag lang puro presidente ang pinag-uusapan natin, wag lang puro vice, wag lang puro senador. Boboto tayo all the way down hanggang sa bukal natin. And tandaan natin, in terms of impact on our daily lives, mas malaki po ang impact ng ating local government sa ating buhay kasi frontline po yan. So, wag nating palalampasin yung pagkakataon na sila rin siyasatin natin kung sila ba ay magaling, kung sino yung gusto nating piliin at kung bakit.
There are over 18,000 local positions up for grabs for district congressmen, governors, mayors, down to councilors. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, fans hyped up for the 2023 FIBA World Cup can get their tickets in just a few months. And P-pop is riding high on the Billboard Hot Trending Songs chart. We'll tell you about SB19's record-breaking feat when we return.
Sa new normal, kailangan ng mga diabetics ang mas malakas na resistensya. Mag-diabetasol. May vitamins pamparesistensya at VitaDigest pang-manage ng blood sugar at gutom. Kaya't huwag mag-diabetes. Mag-diabetasol.
Sa mga panahon ngayon, kailangan po natin si dating Secretary Gibo Chidoro. Si Gibo ay dating kongresista, bar top-notcher at higit sa lahat ang pinakabatang Secretary of National Defense sa kasaysayan ng bansa. Naging chairman ng NBCC, malaki ang maitutulong ni Gibo para maibalik ang mga trabaho at mapalakas ang ekonomiya. Gibo Chidoro, galing at talino para sa bagong Pilipinas.
Kay dami mong pinagdaanan, ngayon pa ba susukuan? Kung lahat tayo'y nabibigatan, sama-sama natin tong lagpasan. Sa bawat laban, hinebra tayo, at sa pag-ahon, hinebra tayo. Sa huling patak ng bagong tapang, pagsubok mo ay malalampasan. Sasama-samang huling patak, tumitindig ang
back to CNN Philippines. The National Telecommunications Commission awards television frequencies previously used by ABS-CBN to other media companies. The NTC granted channels 2 and 16 to Advanced Media Broadcasting System, owned by former Senator Manny Villar. The company will be able to operate the analog and digital TV channels in Metro Manila and nearby provinces until 2023. Villar's company received a 25-year franchise to operate TV service in 2019. Some lawmakers and public policy think tanks slammed the NTC order. House Deputy Minority Leader Representative Carlos Zarate says this is President Rodrigo Duterte's political payback, while InfoWatch Philippines said this looks like a midnight deal, allegedly, between the president and the Villars. Mark Villar was the president's public works secretary and now running for senator under the Marcos Duterte tandem, while his wife, Emeline Aglipay Villar, is justice undersecretary and spokesperson. But the president's spokesman defends the involvement of Malacanang and the Justice Department. Carlo Nograles tells CNN Philippines the NTC merely sought the DOJ's legal opinion and did not mention the names of interested entities when it reached out to Malacanang on the matter. Meanwhile, NTC also awarding Channel 23 to Aliw Broadcasting, the operator of radio station DWIZ, which was founded by former Ambassador Antonio Cabangon Chua. Channel 43 will go to the broadcasting company owned by Pastor Apollo Quiboloy, President Duterte's former spiritual advisor. Athletics Track and Field Association President Philip Elawico has been officially declared persona non grata by the Philippine Olympic Committee. The National Olympic body ratified an early resolution in light of the ongoing rift between Huico and Olympic pole vaulter EJ Obiena. Out of 54 National Sports Associations present, 36 voted in favor of the ruling. President Bambol Tolentino says the POC is simply following procedures from Obiena's complaint over Huico's alleged harassment.
He's still the president of Patapa on other matters, but sa POC, hindi siya presidente ng Patapa sa amin. Anytime na magkasundo si Mr. Huico and EJ, nagkasundo na sila, then withdraw na ni EJ yung complaint niya. Anytime, the Executive Board, the General Assembly, can revisit and reconsider the decision of both.
Moving to the court, if you're excited to watch the country play for the FIBA Basketball World Cup 2023, you can get your tickets as early as March 1st. Limited tickets for Gilas Pilipinas games can be bought via early bird pricing through FIBA's website until the end of March. And overseas, two basketball legends now share a record in the NBA. LeBron James tying with Kobe Bryant for 14th most games played in the league. Both have competed in the court 1,346 times. The milestone was completed right on the eve of Kobe's second death anniversary. Fans mourn the Los Angeles Lakers veteran today, with Kobe dying in a helicopter crash alongside 8 others back in 2020. Among those killed was his 13-year-old daughter, Gianna. In his 2 decades playing for the Lakers, Kobe scored 5 NBA championships. The basketball icon also visited the Philippines 6 times. Back here at home, Pinoy pop group SB19 breaks a record on the Billboard Hot Trending chart. They now have the longest #1 streak on the list with the hit single Bazinga. The track spends its 7th week on the top spot, surpassing BTS's Butter with its record of 6 weeks. The Hot Trending Songs chart tracks Twitter interactions, mentioning today's most popular songs. And that is it for now. Join me again on news.ph at 7 p.m. I'm Pio Ontiveros for Newsnight, where we go above and beyond the headlines.
Mas pinalawak, mas pinalakas. RPN sa iba't ibang mga lalawigan. DZRL Bataan, DZBS Baguio, DZKI Iriga, DYKB Bacolod, DYKC Cebu, DXKS Surigao, DXKD Dipolo, DXKO Cagayan de Oro, DXKT Davao, DXKP Pagadian, DXXX Zamboanga, DXDX General Santos.
RPN Radio Philippines Network.
XKD Dipolo Radyo Ronda. Member, kapisanan ng mga broadcaster ng Pilipinas.
Many of you have probably experienced a sinus infection. It's one of the most common conditions. A sinus infection, also known as sinusitis, is the inflammation or swelling of the tissues lining your sinuses. The small air pockets behind your forehead, your nose, your cheekbones, and in between your eyes. It can develop after a cold, the flu, or even just an allergic reaction. But today, people might mistake sinusitis for COVID-19. The symptoms of the two are very similar, and from headaches to difficulty breathing and even loss of smell and taste. Here on MedTalk Health Talk, we'll discuss how to tell them apart and how to best avoid them altogether. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez. This is CNN Philippines. Sinusitis and COVID-19 are two conditions that have very similar warning signs. Today, we'll help you tell the difference. We'd like to welcome our guests for today. With us is Dr. Paulo Catindig. He's an ENT head and neck surgeon and rhinologist from the Makati Medical Center. Also with us is Dr. Elmer Angus. He's a family medicine specialist and past department head of community and family medicine at Manila Doctors Hospital. Ngayon, bago natin pag-usapan ang pagkakaiba ng sinusitis at COVID-19, pag-usapan muna natin kung ano ba talaga ang sinusitis. Dr. Paulo, could you tell us more about what this is?
Sinusitis per se is the inflammation of the sinuses or lining of our paranasal sinuses. Basically, we have our maxillary, the one is located here in the front, in between our nose, what we call the ethmoids, the one behind our nose, our sphenoid, and the one at the topmost portion is our frontal sinuses. So if you have an inflammation of these areas, we call it collectively as our sinusitis. However, sinusitis per se is not really just the sinuses. Now we call it as rhinosinusitis because most of the time it's not only the sinuses that's got infected, even the internal lining of the nose has got inflamed. That's why it would come up with sinusitis as well.
Sinusitis or rhinosinusitis is actually a very common condition, and there are different types that can range from acute to actually chronic. Dr. Paulo, what are some of the types of sinusitis na pwede ma-experience ng mga tao?
Patient would have symptoms such as facial pains, nasal obstruction, anterior and posterior post-nasal drips, and patient would have reduced smell, reduce in smell and in pain. So usually these symptoms would last, depending if it is acute, less than 12 weeks, but if it is chronic, more than 12 weeks in duration.
Acute sinusitis, as mentioned by Dr. Paulo, has a short duration. It can last anywhere from around 2 to 4 weeks. Pero Dr. Elmer, ano ba talaga ang ibig sabihin ng acute at bakit nangyayari itong klaseng condition?
Acute meaning between 1 to 2 weeks, no? Usually viral yan. And then when it is already more than 2 weeks, abot siya ng 4 weeks, bacterial na po yan. So subacute naman, after that, kung lalampas pa, it may come up to 3 months, no? And then pag lampas pa niyan, it will be a chronic already, usually more than 3 months na.
I'd like to focus for this episode on the acute rhinosinusitis because dito pwede magkaroon ng similar symptoms with that of COVID-19. Dr. Paulo, when it comes to acute rhinosinusitis, let's remind our viewers again kung ano ang pwede nilang maramdaman.
For acute rhinosinusitis, patient can have, again, nasal obstruction, facial pains, nasal discharge. Patient can also have loss of smell, decrease in sense of smell as well.
So let's talk a little bit more about some of the conditions that could develop into a sinus infection. But I'd like to talk about certain things. For that matter, a deviated nasal septum, or ito yung pagkatabingi ng ilong, hindi siya diretso. Dr. Paulo, how can this contribute to someone having acute rhinosinusitis?
When we look at the patient's CT scans, some patients would complain of, again, nasal congestion, some patients would not. But in reality, hindi naman talaga siya diretsong-diretso. There are some instances that your nasal septum can be really deviated. It's really the degree of the deviation that would cause the nasal obstruction, the symptoms of the patient. Kapag sobrang deviated, dun lang. Some patient would have some trauma. For example, pagkaroon ka ng trauma, nabangga, yung iba biglang mababali either yung septum or magkakaroon ng nasal bone fracture. So the deviation can trigger bigla na lang, Doc, biglang nawalan ako ng pang-amoy.
Are nasal polyps the same as polyps found in other parts of the body? How can this contribute to rhinosinusitis?
So nasal polyps are inflammatory tissues that got engorged actually. There's really no specific reason until now on why these polyps would come, but most of the time it is correlated because of chronic inflammation. That's why we consider nasal polyp formation as a chronic problem as well.
Now, Dr. Elmer, kapag ang pasyente pumunta sa inyo at nagreklamo ng mga ganitong klaseng simptomas, are there any signs and symptoms that would make you immediately say that this is a case of rhinosinusitis as opposed to other possible diseases such as COVID-19?
There are symptoms that you can really pinpoint na yung rhinosinusitis mo ay hindi COVID, no? One of that is yung gastrointestinal symptoms like diarrhea, no? Wala namang diarrhea and sinusitis. Aside from that, you are going to have body aches and pains, and especially kung prone na talaga siya sa COVID, no? Positive na. And then you will develop what we call shortness of breath or tawag namin SOB. And magkaroon ka na ng loss of smell or tastes.
Now, when we return, more telltale signs of sinusitis and how we can tell them apart from COVID-19 symptoms. Keep it here on Med Talk Health Talk. You're watching CNN Philippines. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez and welcome back to Med Talk Health Talk, where your health comes first. Overlapping can make it hard to tell if you have COVID-19 or rhinosinusitis infection. Here on the program, we'll help you tell them apart. I'll go with Dr. Elmer on this one. Pinag-usapan natin yung mga symptoms that are shared between COVID-19 and rhinosinusitis. Let's review here in particular itong nasal congestion. Is this a common symptom with COVID-19 and rhinosinusitis?
Runny nose, or what we call the so-called congestion of the nose, common yan sa rhinosinusitis. Same time, meron din yan sa COVID-19.
A lot of people now are really worried, especially it's the pandemic, we have different variants. Any sort of symptom may make them think that it is already COVID-19. I'll go with Dr. Paulo on the next one. And it's quite common nowadays that people with COVID-19 say that they lose their smell, as well as humihina or nawawala yung panlasa nila. And this is also a shared trait with someone who is experiencing rhinosinusitis. But Dr. Paulo, can you help us distinguish how one would think of one disease as opposed to the other?
For patients with sinusitis, more likely patients with chronic rhinosinusitis, so patient even before the advent of COVID-19, even pre-pandemic, patient would always complain of, Doc, lagi naman akong sinisipon eh. Tapos the patient would tell us, Doc, paulit-ulit, tas laging nawawala yung pangamoy ko, babalik, nawawala, bumabalik. No? So that's one category that clinically, more likely, the patient had chronic sinusitis even before. Now, if it is a new onset, that the patient would have fever, cough, runny nose, sore throat, aside and a new onset of anosmia or nagwala ng pangamoy and panglasa, then probably that's the time we investigate.
Now, Dr. Elmer, let's remind our viewers again some of the symptoms ng COVID-19 na nakikita lang or very likely na nasa COVID-19 lamang.
There are symptoms that are found in COVID-19, no? Like this is not associated with sinusitis. Yung shortness of breath, yung body aches and pains, sa COVID yan. And of course, merong loss of smell and taste.
Earlier you mentioned the symptom of facial pain that is very characteristic of someone with rhinosinusitis. Now, can someone who is experiencing rhinosinusitis also feel symptoms that of the flu, body aches and pains, the very generalized feelings of the flu that can make them think twice whether this is just a case of rhinosinusitis or if this is warranted to be tested for COVID-19?
So aside from the facial pains, the patient would have anosmia and the patient would develop cough, sore throat, then more likely I would link mag-isip ako na more likely baka COVID-19 ito, no, rather than just acute sinusitis. But if the patient would just complain of facial pains alone, then runny nose, then more likely it can be just acute sinusitis.
Now, like any infection, sinusitis can also contribute to a weakened immune system. And with COVID-19 still around, it's vital to keep healthy as well as protected. Dr. Elmer, can rhinosinusitis or sinusitis evolve into COVID-19?
I have sinusitis at the same time, nagkaroon ako ng COVID, no? But first, you have to think of the symptoms kung kailan sila first nag-appear, no? You are going to have severe symptoms kung magkaroon ka ng COVID, like 20% of them will have severe symptoms, whereas the sinusitis infection, usually kung viral ang infection or cause noon, it will just go away. And complications will only sit in kung late na or usually bacterial na yung mga causes nila.
Okay.
So, yun ang mga other ways to differentiate sinus infection and COVID-19.
Now, Dr. Paolo, I'd like to ask, for those diagnosed cases naman of allergic rhinitis, sanay na sila with the symptoms of allergic rhinitis, but is it possible that they could have very mild symptoms of COVID-19 already, that they think that they are just having another bout of allergic rhinitis?
Currently, there are patients who are asymptomatic or with just mild symptoms that can be really na masasabi na, pwede palang COVID-19. So we just stick to the, again, history, background of the patient, like what you've mentioned, history of exposure to COVID-19 patients before or in the household. At the same time, another is an important history of patients who had the same characteristic of symptoms within the household.
Dr. Elmer, my question for you is, when do we need to visit a doctor or hospital for proper testing?
In case you have COVID-19, you have to go for COVID tests, no, right away, to be sure if the symptoms are due to COVID and not for other illnesses. Then stay at home while you are waiting for the release of the tests.
If you're feeling symptoms after a short break, we want to be your partner for a lifetime of good health here on MedTalk Health Talk. Stay with us on CNN Philippines. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez and glad to have you back on MedTalk Health Talk. While sinusitis and COVID-19 have very similar symptoms, treatment for each is also very different. Today we'll discuss what to do if you think you have either condition. Now, we've mentioned that symptoms of sinusitis usually go away on their own, and 70% of people actually recover from rhinosinusitis without the use of prescription medications. But if you have sinusitis and your symptoms are disrupting your day-to-day, there are some home remedies that can help. Dr. Paulo, can you give some of your tried and true home remedies to our viewers?
Sinusitis, and most of the time it's viral. So you can buy actually your over-the-counter nasal decongestants at times. It's also helpful as well. Then increase your immune system, like taking your vitamins regularly. It's also an important factor also.
And make sure to stay well hydrated, rest, and drink a good bowl of soup. These natural remedies can help your body fight the infection. But when your sinusitis is caused by a bacterial infection, antibiotics is usually recommended to relieve some of the symptoms faster. Dr. Paulo, when it comes to antibiotic use, when is this needed? How is this used? And can our viewers self-medicate on their own?
Your ENT doctor might request for a nasal endoscopy, or they would check the inside of your nose. So aside from the usual, the typical symptoms of facial pains and discharge, your doctor wanted to check the patency of your osteomiatus or your meatus, and then check if there is pus running down it. So kung may nana na lumalabas na doon sa loob ng ilong, more likely this is bacterial in nature. That's why we start on patients on antibiotics already. I would really not advise patients on the early phase of their disease to start agad ng antibiotics. So if you had symptoms of more than a week and the pain is there and you would see yellowish discoloration of your discharge, then probably that's the time you go and seek to your nearest health clinician and have it checked.
Now, Dr. Paulo, pwede bang umabot sa punto na surgical na ang treatment na kailangan for rhinosinusitis?
So for chronic cases of sinusitis and patient who had nasal septal deviation, nasal polyps, and for kids with chronic rhinosinusitis, you usually advise for surgery already, like what we call the functional endoscopic sinus surgery. And we remove the polyps or the obstruction that causes the inflammation of the sinuses. Then during the surgery, we clean already the sinus areas.
Now, going back to COVID-19, there are many disputed claims on how to treat it, from antiviral medicines to active vaccines. But we can't stress enough that testing for the virus and consulting your doctor are the most important first steps before treatment. Now, Dr. Elmer, can you walk us through what we need to do if we suspect that we have COVID-19?
One, you can do the test for COVID. Number two, while waiting for that, you quarantine yourself. No? Ito kasi tinatawag nating patient focus, no? Na management, no? So we have to let him be quarantined and then wear masks, no? As well as you have to stay 6 feet away from other persons, the so-called social distancing natin.
Now, Dr. Paulo, itong mga home testing kits, I know you're an advocate of the PCR, of course, is the gold standard, but these home testing kits, what's your advice to the viewers? Is this something that they should rely on?
Well, actually, there is some guidelines already released by the Department of Health regarding to this rapid antigen test kits. And I think they released 3 accredited rapid antigen testing kits that is readily available for use. So I think this should be used with just prudence, especially for clinicians who had for us ENTs most especially, who's been seeing patients regularly with nasal complaints. I think it's an added protection for us doctors as well to test our patients who had these symptoms in our clinics.
Dr. Paulo, can you share with us why and how vaccines can help?
So for these vaccines, again, for those patients that doesn't have the infection, hindi pa nagkakaroon ng infection, our goal is for us to be inoculated with the virus, no, yung dead virus na tinatawag natin. So for us to develop the antibody against this virus.
While COVID-19 is still very much around, protect yourself and your loved ones from it, as well as sinusitis and many other diseases by following the standard safety protocols. Wash your hands frequently, wear a mask, and practice proper social distancing. Those are the basic ones, but they are still very important. I'd like to thank ENT head and neck specialist and rhinologist Dr. Paulo Catindig and family medicine specialist Dr. Elmer Angus for being with us on today's episode. We hope our conversation was very helpful to our viewers. Choose well and choose to be healthy. I'm Dr. Freddy Gomez, and we'll see you again next time. Stay safe, everyone.